This past week, we continued our sermon series on the Gospel of Light and Life from the book of John. We are now looking at the book of signs, or the miracles that Jesus did in John's Gospel, chapters 2 through 12. As we looked at this, we picked out one of them to really focus on this week, and it was the miracle where Jesus healed the blind man. To look at that scripture, I asked the congregation 3 questions and shared these 3 questions that I look at and think about in my daily devotional life, but also as I prepare sermons. The first question is, what does this passage teach me about the Bible characters? Well, as I looked at that scripture about Jesus healing the blind man, it really showed me that there were many people that failed this blind man. The community failed him, his family failed him, and the religious leaders, they all failed him. They all wanted to know what was going on, but they didn't believe who he was and didn't believe what he was saying. The next question I always ask myself is, what does this passage, what does this scripture reveal about Jesus? Well, in this scripture, Jesus was the only one that this blind man could trust. He had to trust Jesus, that Jesus would do what Jesus said he could do, that Jesus had the power to heal him. The man, as he was brought before the Pharisees and the religious leaders after the event, the man was questioned, so what happened? And the man said, I don't know all about Jesus and who he is, but I know this. I once was blind, and now I see. We talked a little bit about how this passage helps and reminds me that Jesus makes a difference in our lives. And the blind man was able to say, before Jesus, I was blind, and now I can see. We thought about, what does it mean? What difference does Jesus make in our lives? And can we share that in simple sentences and in simple ways that we've seen Jesus make a difference? The third question that I always ask is, how does this passage speak to me? You know, the passage actually starts out, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And in the Message version of the gospel, it says, look for what God is doing in our midst. Not look for who to blame or who did what, but look for what God is doing in our midst. This passage reminds me that we always need to look for God in our midst. And I shared the story of a family in our church with a little boy with cancer. And they said, you know, we don't think God gave him cancer, but we know that God is with us through this journey and God will be beside us no matter what happens. My encouragement to you is to take these 3 questions, think about them, use them as you read the scripture of John and the whole scripture of the New and Old Testament, so that you may see Jesus in new ways. Have a great week. See you back here next week.